أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. This is our 13th episode in Introduction to Rijal Studies. In our previous episodes, we discussed several mass authentications. We talked about Tafsir al-Qummi. We talked about Kamil al-Ziyara. We talked about Muhammad ibn Abi Umayr and his marasil. And although the discussion regarding Muhammad ibn Abi Umayr and his marasil is quite lengthy, and there's lots of opinions, however, I think that what we discussed in the last two lectures was sufficient enough for this level, for this introductory level to Ilm al-Rijal. There's lengthier discussions and heavier, more in-depth discussions regarding Muhammad ibn Abi Umayr and his marasil, but I think that what we discussed in the last two episodes is sufficient for this introductory level. So we'll move on to other mass authentications. And today, inshallah, in this episode, we will try to discuss at least 3 or 4 other mass authentications. So one is an authentication regarding Ja'far ibn Bashir. Ja'far ibn Bashir was a pious transmitter of hadith who lived in Kufa, and he died in Al-Abwa in the year 208 after Hijrah. Ja'far ibn Bashir is typically mentioned in the mass authentications, and it is said that whomever Ja'far ibn Bashir narrates from is thiqah, is reliable, and is trustworthy. Why is this? This is because Al-Najashi, the expert on Rijal, in the section on Ja'far ibn Bashir in his Rijal book of biographies, in his section on Ja'far ibn Bashir, this is what he says. Ja'far ibn Bashir al-Bajali al-Washa' min zuhadi ashabina. He's one of the aesthetic companions, one of the aesthetic of our companions, our scholars. وَعَبَّادُهُمْ وَنُسَّاكُهُمْ. He's known for his acts of worship, for his righteousness. وَكَانَ ثِقَةً وَلَهُ مَسْجِدٌ بِالْكُوفَةِ. He was someone reliable, and he has a mosque in Kufa. And then he says, روى عن الثقات ورووا عنه. He narrated from reliable sources. He narrated from reliable men, and reliable men narrated from him. That means he took from reliable men. He narrated from reliable men, and reliable men took from him. They transmitted hadith from him. Several individuals say this is a mass authentication. That means that anyone that is proven to have Ja'far ibn Bashir narrate from him, that means he's reliable. So if we go to the books of Rijal and we see so-and-so transmitter, if Ja'far ibn Bashir relied on him and transmitted a hadith from him, that means he's reliable. He's thiqah. And anyone who transmitted from Ja'far ibn Bashir is also reliable. This is according to what Najashi is saying. Now, some scholars said we can use what Najashi said and benefit a mass authentication from half of what Najashi said and not completely. How is this possible? So we could say this, that whomever Ja'far ibn Bashir relied on their thuqat, because Najashi is clearly saying rawa an thuqat. He narrated from the reliable sources, and this means that he didn't narrate from anyone else. Rawa an thuqat. He narrated only from, obviously Najashi does not say only, but this is a given. That means he doesn't rely upon anyone who's unreliable, untrustworthy. Rawa an thuqat. This we can use. We can say that this is a mass authentication. So if Ja'far ibn Bashir relied upon, let's say, 30 narrators, all of those 30 narrators are reliable and trustworthy. وَرَوَى anhu, which means that reliable men relied on him. This means that anyone that narrated from Ja'far ibn Bashir is also reliable, right? Scholars of Rijal said, we can't rely on this. Why? Because just because you narrate from Ja'far ibn Bashir, it doesn't mean they're all reliable. Because reliable people could have narrated from him, and unreliable people could have narrated from him as well. So we only take the first portion and not the second. This is one opinion. However, Sayyid al-Khoi says that this is unacceptable. This is not a mass authentication. Why? Because Najashi is simply praising Ja'far ibn Bashir, and he's not being very accurate. He's saying that he relied on reliable people and reliable people relied on him. But this is not a restriction, meaning, or how would we say in Arabic, لا يفيد الحصر, meaning just because he relied on reliable sources, it doesn't mean that he never relied on non-reliable sources. So let me give you an example. If I tell you that so-and-so scholar, in his books or in his lectures, he relies on reliable sources, but this doesn't restrict him to reliable sources. It doesn't mean that he never relies on unreliable sources. And this is according to Sayyid al-Khoi, and what strengthens this argument is that Najashi says that وَرَوَوْا عَنْهُ, رَوَى عَنِ الثُّقَاتِ وَرَوَوْا عَنْهُ, and the reliable sources also relied on him. This is not a virtue, because this is not something that's in his hands. You can decide who you narrate from, but you can't decide on who narrates from you. This is one. Two, it's impossible for someone that only reliable people and trustworthy people rely on him. Even Rasulullah, reliable and trustworthy people narrated from him, and there are people that were liars that narrated from him. We know that for a fact. And this person can't become better than the Prophet or better than the Imams. The Imams, there are people that were reliable that narrated from them, and there were people that were liars that narrated from them. You can't decide who narrates from you. You can decide who you narrate from. You can narrate from reliable people, trustworthy people, but you can't decide on who narrates from you. And so this statement, روى عن الثقات ورووا عنه, he narrated from trustworthy individuals, and trustworthy individuals narrated from him. Since they came in the same context, since the second portion cannot be of a restriction, meaning Najashi definitely does not mean that only trustworthy people narrate from him. Probably non-trustworthy people also relied on him. This means that the first portion of what he said also does not have restriction. That means he narrated from trustworthy people and individuals, but at the same time he could have also relied on non-trustworthy people. So this is the argument put forward by Sayyid al-Khoi and by our teacher Sayyid Muhammad Rida al-Sistani, that this statement by al-Najashi, روى عن الثقات وروى عنه, it doesn't mean that all of his transmitters, all of his sources are reliable. In my book, I pose a question, and I say that why can't we take the statement by Najashi for face value? He's clearly stating روى عن الثقات. He narrated from trustworthy, reliable sources. If there's a problem with وروى عنه, that trustworthy sources, trustworthy individuals narrated from him, if we say that this is problematic, because just like trustworthy people narrate from him, non-trustworthy people also narrate from him. If there's a problem with this statement, but there's no problem with روى عن الثقات, he narrated, he relied on trustworthy sources. So in other words, if the statement of Najashi, there's a problem with half of it, but the other half doesn't have a problem, why can't we rely on what Najashi stated? So I reached the conclusion that in fact we can rely on this mass authentication, and we can say that Ja'far ibn Bashir, anyone that is proven to have been a source for Ja'far ibn Bashir and that Ja'far ibn Bashir relied on, he is thiqah. Now, because of this problem by Sayyid al-Khoi and Sayyid Muhammad Rida al-Sistani and others, we won't take the other side of the claim of Najashi, وَرَوَوْا عَنْهُ, that anyone who narrates from Ja'far ibn Bashir is authentic, is reliable. That we will stop short of saying. So basically, when you see Ja'far ibn Bashir in a sanad, in a chain of narrators, anyone that comes after Ja'far ibn Bashir, or the individual that comes directly after Ja'far ibn Bashir, is thiqah, is reliable. But anyone who comes before is not necessarily a thiqah. And of course this requires further debate. So this is one mass authentication. Another mass authentication is regarding Ali ibn al-Hasan al-Taturi. Ali ibn al-Hasan al-Taturi, al-Najashi says regarding him, Ali ibn al-Hasan ibn Muhammad al-Ta'i al-Ma'ruf bil-Taturi, وكان فقيها ثقة في حديثه وكان من وجوه الواقفة. So this person, he lived at the time of Imam Rida. During the time of Imam Rida, there was a school of thought known as Al-Waqifa. This school of thought, Al-Waqifa literally means those who stopped. And it means those who stopped at Imam Musa ibn Ja'far al-Kadhim. They believe in 7 Imams, and they did not accept the Imamah of Imam Rida. Al-Waqifa are of 2 kinds. Some that were deliberate, that knowingly they stopped at Imam Musa al-Kadhim, having known that Imam Rida is the authentic Imam, the genuine Imam. This is one kind of Waqifa. And these people, they stopped at Imam al-Kadhim because of dunya. They had money. Some of them were representatives of Imam al-Kadhim. They had money of khums and other kinds of money that belonged to Imam al-Kadhim. They had to pass it on to Imam Rida. But because they did not want to pass on the money, they said that there's no Imam after Imam al-Kadhim. So for worldly reason, they rejected the Imam of Imam Rida. These were 3-4 individuals. All others that were Waqifa, they followed their leaders. They became Waqifa out of ignorance. They did not know that Imam Rida was an actual Imam. Atari was one. He was a Waqifi by ignorance. despite being a waqifi, he was trustworthy because his waqf, being a waqif, he was out of ignorance, not out of negligence or out of stubbornness. No, out of ignorance. But he was thiqah, he was reliable. Not only was he reliable, and Najashi specifically states, كان فقيها ثقة في حديثه. Shaykh al-Tusi in his Adda, in his book Al-Adda, he says that al-Ta'ifa, the school of thought of Shi'ism, they accepted the ahadith of those that were non-imamis, but they were trustworthy. And he mentions the family of the Taturi, al-Taturiyun. And Ali ibn al-Hasan is part of this family. He was non-imami because he was waqifi, but nevertheless he was trustworthy. Anyhow, so where's the mass authentication? The mass authentication can be found in Kitab al-Fihrist by Shaykh al-Tusi, in which he says, له كتب كثيرة في نصرة مذهبه وله كتب في الفقه رواها عن الرجال الموثوق بهم وبروايتهم. That he has books of fiqh, on fiqh, that he narrated from men that were, of course when they say men, they're not being misogynistic, but because most of the narrators were men. He narrated them from men that were reliable and were trustworthy. رواها عن الرجال الموثوق بهم وبروايتهم. He narrated his books of fiqh from men that were reliable and trustworthy, and their narrations are reliable and trustworthy. Sayyid al-Khoi accepts this توثيق العام, this mass authentication. And regarding Dursat ibn Abi Mansur, Sayyid al-Khoi in his Mu'jam Rijal al-Hadith, his famous book of Rijal, biographies, in the section on Dursat ibn Abi Mansur, he says that he's reliable. Why? Because Ali ibn Hasan al-Taturi relied upon him. That's how we know that Dursat is reliable. He says, الظاهر وثاقة الرجل لرواية علي بن الحسن الطاطري عنه في كتبه. Because Ali ibn al-Hasan al-Taturi, he narrates from Dursat and mentions him in his fiqhi books, that means he relied upon him, that means the man is thiqah, he's reliable. Based on what Shaykh al-Tusi in his book Al-Fihrist mentions. He says he has books of hadith that he narrated from reliable men. So the origin of this mass authentication is what Shaykh al-Tusi says in his Fihrist. And Sayyid al-Khoi accepts this. He accepts this mass authentication. However, we have to put a condition for this mass authentication and say that Ali ibn al-Hasan al-Taturi, anyone who he relies on, is reliable and trustworthy if he narrates from that individual in his book of fiqh, in his fiqhi books. Because this is what Shaykh al-Tusi says, له كتب في الفقه رواها عن الرجال الموثوق بهم. So let's say if Ali ibn al-Hasan al-Taturi has books that do not pertain to fiqh, on aqa'id, on tafsir, and he narrates from certain individuals, this doesn't mean that they're authentic and reliable. The mass authentication is discussing specifically his books of fiqh. So this is one condition. Another condition is that it has to be in his own books. If Ali ibn al-Hasan al-Taturi relies on a narrator in his own book of fiqh, we could rely on that narrator. Which means that if Ali ibn al-Hasan al-Taturi has a narration, a fiqhi narration, and he narrates from certain individuals, but we don't know that he narrated that narration in his book, that's not sufficient enough to take this mass authentication. So how do we know? So for example, in Al-Kafi, in Al-Tahdhib, in Al-Istibsar, if we find a narration, and in the Sanad, Ali ibn al-Hasan al-Taturi is mentioned, and he narrates from certain individuals. How can we, and we want to benefit, we want to say that that's a mass authentication. That narrator that Ali ibn al-Hasan al-Taturi relied on, he's reliable and trustworthy. But how do we know that this narration is mentioned in his book or it's been mentioned in another book. Because we said we can only rely on this mass authentication if the narration has been mentioned in his book. Well, there's a way. If Al-Shaykh al-Tusi in Al-Tahdhib and Al-Istibsar, he begins the sanad by the name of Ali ibn al-Hasan al-Taturi and so and so, we can know that that hadith has been mentioned in Al-Taturi's book. Why? Because Al-Shaykh al-Tusi in his Mashyakha, the end of his book Al-Tahdhib, when he mentions his sanad, his chain of narrators to the books, he says that if I begin any hadith, any narration, with the name of an individual, know that I took that hadith from his book. And in the Mashakha, he mentions his chain of narrators to that book. So in Al-Tahdhib, if he mentions a hadith and he begins by Ali ibn al-Hasan al-Taturi. In Al-Mashakha, he mentions his chain of narrators to Al-Taturi. That means that the book was taken from Al-Taturi's book. And we can rely on that mass authentication. So this is a second mass authentication. A third authentication is Ismail ibn Maymun al-Za'farani. This is another respected individual, scholar, in which An-Najashi says regarding him, ثقة عين روى عن الثقات وروى عنهم. روى عنه الثقات وروى عنهم. This is very similar to what was mentioned regarding Ja'far ibn Bashir. Al-Najashi says regarding Al-Za'farani, Ismail ibn Maymun al-Za'farani, that he was reliable and that reliable individuals relied on him and he relied on them. You see, it's very similar to the statement that was mentioned regarding Ja'far ibn Bashir. And of course, individuals like Sayyid al-Khoi, who did not accept this mass authentication regarding Ja'far ibn Bashir, would not accept it regarding Al-Za'farani either. But as we mentioned earlier, that in fact we can rely on such a statement. روى عنه الثقات وروى عنهم. If we can't benefit a mass authentication from those who narrated from him, at least we can benefit a mass authentication from those that he narrated from, the same way that we mentioned regarding Ja'far ibn Bashir. The fourth mass authentication that we'll mention in this episode is regarding Abu Ghalib al-Zurari wa Abu Ali ibn Humam. These two individuals, these two highly respected scholars, teachers, and narrators. And they were both teachers of An-Najashi. These two individuals, Abu Ghalib al-Zurari and Abu Ali ibn Humam, they were teachers of Shaykh al-Najashi. So they were scholars of Rijal, they were scholars of Hadith, they were narrators themselves. It is said that they do not rely on anyone who is unreliable and anyone who is untrustworthy. Whoever they narrated from has to be reliable and trustworthy. So if we see Abu Ghalib al-Zurari narrate from someone and we don't know whether he's reliable or not, we can say that he is reliable. And the same thing goes for Ali ibn Humam. How do we know this? How do we know? What's the origin of this mass authentication? The origin is what Al-Najashi said in the biography of Ja'far ibn Muhammad ibn Malik. Ja'far ibn Muhammad ibn Malik, Al-Najashi says, كان ضعيفا في الحديث. He was very weak in narrations. قال أحمد بن الحسين الغضائري. He says, Al-Ghadairi says, كان يضع الحديث وضعا. He would fabricate narrations. Whom? Ja'far ibn Muhammad ibn Malik. He would fabricate narrations. ويروي عن المجاهيل. And he would rely upon unknown narrators Are they reliable? Are they unreliable? He would just rely on anyone. And he says, وَسَمِعْتُ مَنْ قَالَ أيضا, Najashi says, فَاسِدُ الْمَذْهَبُ وَالرَّوَايَ. I heard some people say that he's corrupt both in his school of thought and in his narrations, meaning that he's unreliable, neither in his school of thought, neither in his narrations, meaning he's not an imami. And then he says, وَلَا أَدْرِي كَيْفَ رَوَى عَنْهُ شَيْخُنَا النَّبِيلُ الثِّقَةُ أبو علي بن همام وشيخنا الجليل الثقة أبو غالب الزراري. He says, and I am astonished why Abu Ali bin Humam and Abu Ghalib al-Zurari narrated from him. You see, Najashi is surprised why Abu Ghalib al-Zurari and why Abu Ali bin Humam have relied on someone weak like Ja'far ibn Muhammad ibn Malik. This means, although al-Najashi does not explicitly say that Abu Ghalib al-Zurari and Abu Ali bin Humam only narrate from those individuals that are reliable and trustworthy, but his shock, his he's being baffled. That shows that these individuals don't rely on weak narrators. Otherwise, why would he be shocked? It's like if you have a friend and that goes to a mixed wedding, and you're so shocked to know that your friend goes to a mixed wedding. That shock shows that your friend typically does not go to a mixed wedding, because if your friend usually goes to a mixed wedding, you wouldn't be shocked, right? Here, Najashi is shocked why Abu Ghalib al-Zurari and Abu Ali bin Humam are narrating from someone that is weak. This shows that they typically do not rely upon someone who is weak. They only rely on someone who is trustworthy. So that is a mass authentication. Anyone that Abu Ghalib al-Zurari and Abu Ali bin Humam rely upon, that person must be trustworthy and reliable. However, some came and said that no, this is not a mass authentication. Why? Because Ja'far ibn Muhammad ibn Malik wasn't just someone who was weak. No, he was corrupt in his school of thought and in his hadith, meaning very, very weak. Someone who would fabricate narrations. You see, كان يضع الحديث وضعا ضعيفا في الحديث فاسد المذهب والرواية يروي عن المجاهيل. He relied on individuals that were unknown. He fabricated narrations. He was not an imami. His hadith were weak. You see, someone who was weak from all sides. Someone who was exceptionally weak. So some say that Abu Ghalib al-Zurari and Abu Ali bin Humam, they narrated from someone so weak that An-Najashi was surprised. This doesn't mean that they only rely on reliable narrators and trustworthy narrators. No, he's shocked because someone like Ja'far ibn Muhammad ibn Malik, who has so many bad qualities, how can Abu Ghalib al-Zurari and Abu Ali ibn Humam depend on? You see, so he wasn't just your ordinary person who's weak, someone who's lied a couple of times. No, someone who's very, very weak, someone who has lots of bad qualities. How can someone like Abu Ghalib al-Zurari rely on someone like Ja'far ibn Muhammad ibn Malik? Right? So several scholars, they said that perhaps Abu Ghalib al-Zurari and Abu Ali bin Humam, they might narrate from someone who's weak. But it's a shock when they narrate from someone who has all of these bad qualities. Someone who has all of these bad qualities, it's a shock for Abu Ghalib al-Zurari to rely on and narrate from. But if someone who's not a thiqah, simply, he's not a thiqah, he could be majhul, he could be unknown, right? His qualities are unknown. We don't know, is he reliable or unreliable? Perhaps Abu Ghalib al-Zurari might narrate from, but he will not narrate from someone who's completely weak and has all of these bad qualities. However, I disagree, and I argue against. Why? Because one of the problems with Ja'far ibn Muhammad ibn Malik was that وَيَرْوِي عَنِ الْمَجَاهِيل. he would narrate from individuals that their qualities were unknown. Was he thiqa? Is he thiqa? Is he da'if? Unknown. This in itself was a taboo, to rely upon narrators that were majahil, that you don't know, are they reliable or unreliable. So two things were a taboo. Narrating a narration from someone who's weak, and narrating a narration from someone who's unknown. Ja'far ibn Malik, one of his bad qualities was that he narrated from individuals that were unknown. So how could Abu Ghalib al-Zurari do the same? You see, Al-Najashi is shocked that Abu Ghalib al-Zurari is narrating from Ja'far ibn Bashir, who has several bad qualities. One of his bad qualities is that he narrated from individuals that were unknown. So how can Abu Ghalib al-Zurari, he himself, have such an attribute? Narrate from some certain individuals that are unknown. Are they thiqa or are they non-thiqa? Are they thiqa or da'if? Thus, I gather from Al-Najashi's shock and astonishment that indeed, whoever Abu Ghalib al-Zurari and Abu Ali bin Humam narrate from, they are reliable. Wallahu al-alim. And we will continue the mass authentications in a coming episode, inshaAllah. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa alihi al-tahirin.